Welcome to a Modern Nonprofit podcast, powered by the Charity CFO, your compass for creative solutions in running your nonprofit. I'm Tasha Anderson, your host and guide through this nonprofit maze. From fundraising to volunteer management, we've got your back. Join us each episode for fresh, game-changing strategies that can make a real impact. Hey friends, welcome back. We are doing another episode of a Modern Nonprofit podcast. I'm Tasha Anderson, your host. And today I brought along my new friend, Ms. Trina Ramsey. Trina, you are a lot of things, a coach, an author, motivational speaker, and hopefully you're going to motivate some of us today. And you are also the founder of Just Do You Institute for Women's Empowerment. And today, friends, we're going to talk about some things that I think any nonprofit leader can relate to. It's self-care, taking care of ourselves, some of the emotional support we need, and we're going to dive into all those topics. But first and foremost, Trina, thank you for joining me and having this conversation, taking your time out of your busy schedule.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm very passionate about this after having 25 years nonprofit. So I'm glad you created the space. Thank
you. Yeah, thank you for saying that. I know it feels very lonely being a leader at the top sometimes, and the weight that the nonprofit leaders carry is overwhelming, to put it quite simply at times. So I think this is a really important conversation. So, I've certainly spent, I keep saying 15 years for several years now, so it's certainly more than that. But I spent most of my professional career working in and around the nonprofit space. And I used to work for a nonprofit. I was a leader of a nonprofit, so I can relate to these topics really well. But from your perspective and all of your work with women, and specifically those working within the nonprofit space, what do you think that women specifically that work in or just leaders in general, maybe not exclusively women, but what do you think leaders in the nonprofit space, what's unique about some of the things that they're struggling with?
Yeah. So I think it's a combination of things. I was talking to another friend who is a consultant to nonprofits, and he was saying just the misnomer nonprofit, this sense of scarcity that really permeates the industry, including our relationship with funders, including how grants are, administered and things like that. So there's a lot that's being asked of people. There tends to be that scarcity mindset can actually cause leaders to feel like they can't hire enough people, or there struggles with the board around capacity, and the very real, I'm sure you ran into it, like you might have one job title, but you might be wearing 3 or 4 hats.
100%. Yeah.
So 100%. Those are issues. And then it's, as a leader, it's even more so because you're also leading a team that might be dealing with burnout or, over, and you may be dealing with that yourself. I certainly have myself as well. So fall into the trap of kind of letting that show more, and then also tensions and things like that. And it just is like a snowball.
Yeah. I heard this really cool quote on a previous episode of our podcast, and someone said that essentially running a nonprofit is the equivalent of stepping into running a Fortune, or he said, I think, publicly traded company, or imagine like a Fortune 500 company, right? In having all of the eyes on you. I mean, imagine stepping into, your board and having their eyes on you, and the funders or investors, right? And then you have the government, think of the SEC and all of these people that are constantly putting pressure and pressure and pressure. But the reality is, we as leaders of nonprofits, we don't have the Fortune 500 infrastructure. We don't have the ability to build out what we need to actually be responsive to all of these people that are wanting something from you. And I thought that was such a beautiful, or terrifying analogy to use, right? And it's so true. And it really stuck with me. And I've been saying it so much since, because I feel like nothing else has really been able to capture quite that sense of overwhelm in a way that was. So I could absolutely see why that just drains on the emotional state of the leaders of nonprofit organizations. We talked about scarcity, but what about this idea of the abundance factor that you talk about in your work. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it is a very big internal shift that you need to make. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we talk about what you focus on expands, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if you are walking around thinking there's not enough time, there's not enough money, there's not enough resources,
Mm-hmm.
there are not enough hours in the day, I need more staff, you are
Mm-hmm.
really
Mm-hmm.
starting to draw that. And then you're also wearing that energy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I have been actually, I said this in a previous job, where people were talking about it was during the pandemic and people were talking about, well, we need 4 different contingency plans and we need to start thinking about
Mm-hmm.
staff and all this stuff. And this was
Yeah.
early when we thought we were
Mm-hmm.
only out, right? Remember that? So,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, this is a scarcity mindset. And it didn't sit
Mm.
the leader at the time, but it's true. And so what we
Yeah.
can is we can flip it and we can start thinking about being more expansive in how we're doing our
Mm.
work and also being more discerning about what we're choosing. Because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
things that are imposed upon us that we have no choice, like when you think about grant deadlines,
Mm-hmm.
deliverable, programmatic,
Mm-hmm.
things of those nature. But sometimes we actually heave more stuff onto ourselves because we want to pursue a cool idea, or there might be a mission creep type of thing that happens where
Mm.
there's money over here. And if we just shift ourselves a little bit, and then it kind of creates a whole thing because you're chasing the money and you're not kind
Right.
of trusting the universe. And the other piece around abundancy is just also within yourself, understanding and knowing I am enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a worthiness conversation that many of us, I know I have dealt with it on and off over my career,
Absolutely.
leading 25 years in nonprofits. It
Mm-hmm.
You can, see all these external factors and feel like, oh, I'm not working hard enough, I'm not doing enough. But the truth of the matter is that we actually need to and must honor ourselves and our own
Mm-hmm.
agency and learn how to set better boundaries and also
Yes.
for the people who report to us as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. We have to role model that. I never said this publicly because it's a very interesting figure, but you talked about the scarcity mindset. And I certainly remember working for a nonprofit and putting the budget together and having to make really difficult decisions. And I would say that organization really operated out of a scarcity mindset. And then when I started my practice and worked with hundreds of nonprofits since then, it's rare that you find an organization that really thinks with an abundance mindset based on my experience, right? We tend to default to the scarcity mindset. And I talk to nonprofit leaders a lot about, I think for me, the biggest difference meeting now and being a kind of a for-profit entrepreneur myself and seeing the similarities of that mindset versus the mindset I had and what I saw in my peers in the nonprofit space was more like the nonprofit world focuses more on expenses and reducing expenses and controlling expenses. And that, of course, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that that's not real life. It is. But in the entrepreneurial spirit world and the friends that I know that have built businesses, they focus on revenue. And so that controversial figure that I was kind of hinting at earlier is this guy called Grant Cardone. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he has this phrase that when I was doubting myself and I was doubting, scarcity when I was building this business, he has this phrase, who has my money and they just don't know it yet, right? He has this idea, he's a sales guy. And I joked about that with some of the leaders of nonprofits. It's like, who has your organization's money and wants to gift it to you by way of support and donations? They just don't know it yet. They don't know about you yet. They don't know about your causes yet. And if you saw Grant Cardone, it'd be like, wow, how could this guy be related to the nonprofit space? But he is the epitome of abundance. I mean, he walks around and tells himself this so much that he believes it. And in times of doubt for me, I would just have this going on in my mind. So you said it's a mindset shift, and it is, and how to move from scarcity. And I think that was great that you called it out in that moment. And how to shift into that abundance mindset. It really is a lot of those affirmations and self-talk and, getting yourself into that mindset. That's what I've seen work, at least for me. And other people that I've worked with and seen. So it's
Yeah, I love
interesting.
that quote. I love it. I love it. I love
Yes,
it.
yes, you go watch him. He's a character. He's a character. But hey, it's worked for him. As he's flying around in his private jet. So I don't know. Obviously, it's worked for him. One of the things that we talked about a little bit was, kind of being that role model as a leader, and that's a whole separate burden to carry, right? And showing self-care for yourself and balance between your work and your responsibilities. We talk about this a lot in the nonprofit space. I think we're all pretty guilty of not following through with it. But there is kind of an expectation, I think, for leaders, if they really want their team to buy into this balance and self-care, they have to role model that themselves. So how have you seen leaders really lead by example, on both the balance and this kind of abundance mindset?
Yeah, I think part of it is really like, I don't know how much you run into people like not using their vacation time
Mm-hmm.
or taking vacation and then working while you're on vacation, or even
Mm-hmm.
when I've definitely seen that. And so it does start with you, because if
Mm-hmm.
you're saying one thing, if you're telling your team, oh, well, make sure that you're, not running into, and I had this example in a former job where star performer, but very much a, external, needing external validation. And this
Mm-hmm.
person always like end up, the organization, he capped out on his vacation time because he wasn't using it. And so we
Mm-hmm.
we these very tough conversations, because there's like, oh yeah, there's all this work. I'm like, yes, but you,
Mm-hmm.
Matt, you're going to get sick. You
Mm-hmm.
will, you have to take the time, and the work will, we will handle it. It's
Right.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that is something I really had to start being a bit evangelistic about it, even with myself. And so I would
Mm-hmm.
talk with my about self-care. If I needed to take a mental health day, I would call it out and say, I'm taking a
Mm-hmm.
mental health day.
I love that.
Also would be sure to talk to people about strategies. And I would also talk to my peers and say, okay, this is whatever is happening, I call out a specific thing and say, this isn't healthy.
Right.
What you do as a leadership team to shift this dynamic, because if we are operating in this way, then people will see us as the leaders of the organization and say, okay, this must be how I'm supposed to do it. And
Right.
then they will pursue. But it does take being willing to say an uncomfortable thing, being willing to
Mm-hmm.
pause, and being willing to model it yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
patient time, and really be like, don't call me. You can,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
hard again in nonprofits. And I think that one of the overarching things in nonprofits is we care.
Right.
It's there's a cause, there are people, there are urgent needs in the world, and it draws people who are heart centered and want to make a
Mm-hmm.
difference. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, sometimes that balance can tip
Right.
where they're saving the world, but they're losing themselves. And that's part of what I'm
Yeah.
automation. Yeah.
I love that. I think you said some really great things there where it's taking the time off and you have people that are in that space because they care. And I think I experience and I've seen where one of the gaps is the faith that the nonprofit will be okay if you take that time away, right? And I know for a lot of capacity restraints that it's not possible to have overlap or cross training in certain areas. But I've noticed in my experience back when I worked at the nonprofit space, or what I've heard from other people, that when you know that your work is just piling up and piling up and piling up in your absence, it's really hard to unplug and unwind and feel okay by being away when you know you're going to come back to even more work. You either have to work really hard to get there and then really hard when you come back. And so to the degree it's possible, I really encourage all businesses, for profit, nonprofit, it doesn't matter, to really think about how can we build structures for people to take time off. Because I know we're talking about like PTO and things like that, but I've personally had experiences where I've had to take an unexpected leave or a planned leave off. And when I
Mhm.
came back, and it was not well planned for me to take time off. And that's understandable when it's unplanned. But when it is such a, you don't forget that when you're an employee and it's like, look, when life really happens and gets messy for me and I need to take a minute away after I've poured everything into my job and I come back and you all have really made no plans for my absence, or you were not able to get any resources to help with that absence. Now I'm coming back after whatever has now caused me, whether it's the birth of a child or a loss of a family member or a medical issue. You're probably not your 100% self when you come back after a leave, usually. I think about those times that are really memorable for people and not in a positive way. And I think if we're not careful, it can really breed some resentment. And so, I'm just thinking of like long term staff satisfaction, how to keep people engaged and happy and feel like it's okay and safe to take time away without having to pay for it later on. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really important lesson that all businesses need to be thinking about for their team members.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really important what you brought up because it's one thing to take a vacation here or there, but
Mm-hmm.
life does happen and tragedies
Mm-hmm.
happen, and
Mm-hmm.
emergencies and things like that. And it's unfortunate in a situation like what you just described, what can
Mm-hmm.
happen. Then what the lesson that you could take from that is it's not worth it to take the time off. I don't
Right.
trust the organization to take care of the workload, and it's
Right.
not just what it's going to cost me on the back
Right.
end. So I'm
Yeah.
continue to put myself into the ground. It's
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy and it's not appropriate. And I do think that it's incumbent upon leaders at the executive level of the
Mm-hmm.
organization to really be thinking through these things and be thinking through things like cross training, contingency planning, documenting, which is, I know that's another thing that I've run into is very difficult. If
Mm-hmm.
you're burning a candle at both ends, it's really hard to actually set up your systems and have everything
Exactly.
documented. And if you do step away, or if you get another job, or
Yeah.
a fun, there are people that say you get hit by a bus. I don't like that one. Something
Yeah.
fun happens, you hit the lottery and you need to go, or you want to go, that things can carry on without
Yeah.
you. It does take an entire organization to look at their culture, to really
Mm-hmm.
be about thinking through these things, and even things like sabbatical policies. If
Yes. Let's normalize that.
Yeah, and there are, I have not been privy to it myself, but I know of people who have had the opportunity to do that. But you also need to have that scaffolding so that when that person does step away, that there are handoffs, or there are
Mm-hmm.
causes of workload, because you can't, like you
Right.
said, the machine can't be continuing to go when you're gone for 6 months or whatever, and then you come back to a ridiculous
Mm-hmm.
backlog that makes it feel like, why did I do this to myself, instead of enjoying the fact that you earned that time off because of your loyalty to the organization.
And you bring up an interesting point with sabbaticals because many of you all may not know I've kind of forced myself to take a sabbatical, and it's not really for the reasons that people think. Yes, it's nice, although actually I kind of got really restless when I was out. I took a full 30 days off work, and I know some people take longer sabbaticals than that, but that was a lot for me because never in my life have I really taken more than a week. So 30 days was really significant for me. And I did this a couple years ago, and I did this mostly to test the business in my
Mm,
absence to give me peace of mind on understanding the vulnerabilities if something happened to me unexpectedly, and how would this business carry on at least in the short term, 30-ish days or so. How do we determine what those vulnerabilities? You talked earlier about all these contingency plans, and all the nonprofits have to come up with contingency plans. They have succession plans, and they have risk management plans. They have all these things, some, ideally. But nobody ever tests them, right? And so by forcing sabbaticals is not only great for replenishing, your, mental health and kind of emotional well-being, but it really allows the organization to proactively plan, okay, if this person is gone for 30 days, what do we need to make sure that there's going to be coverage for? And then when they do leave for 30 days, it gives you a really clear picture of what you need to work on, right? It's like, well, I had to really struggle for this, or I didn't know this answer, or, any of those things, down to how to pay bills, to, how to renew an insurance, to, all those kind of administrative things. And 30 days is a good time because the full cycle of kind of business happens in that way. For a nonprofit, you might have a new employee, you might have a grant application due, you might have bills that need to be paid, reports sent out, maybe even a board meeting. What would happen if you weren't there? And who's assigned your backup? So normalize sabbaticals, not just because it's good for self, it's good for business. And it's been amazing, like what you can learn. So I'm always talking about normalizing that. And if you're listening and you need to find a way to get your board signed off on that, send them this clip and tell them, like, it's good for business too. And it's part of your succession plan test. So what other trends are you seeing, Trina, in the nonprofit space? You talked about culture. I'm curious, like, what other trends are you seeing that might be impacting culture in that sector?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think opened up as a unexpected gift from the pandemic is a great awareness of social and emotional well-being. And you see that there is more investment in time off, kind of relaxing of policies around wellness and things of that nature.
Yeah.
People to use their benefits for therapy, for example, and also creating space for having real conversations, like talking circles within the organ around whatever employees may end up needing to talk about that are not about their core responsibilities, or certainly because we also both had the health issues with the pandemic, and then we had the kind of explosion around racial equity and things of that nature. Creating space for people to be able to have a safe space to tell the truth about what they're feeling, and then also have that connection with other people so that they may not feel so isolated with the issues that they're facing. Those are some things that I see are happening here and there, and even getting to the policy level. The one organization I worked for now has a DEI committee on the board, which it didn't have before, for example.
Great. I love that. And I've noticed kind of, some of the other trends, like statistics I've seen lately, is just I read in a couple different sources, the nonprofit industry has the highest turnover of any industry, which is a little surprising to me, but maybe not if I thought about it. When I first read it, it was surprising. Then I thought about it, I'm like, maybe not. And you're hearing more and more, and I'm sure you see this in your work, that leaders of nonprofits are getting burnt out more than they ever have, choosing to leave the industry. And I think I read a statistic that even leaders of color are even more burnout and leaving at a faster rate than other leaders. And so it really creates a bit of a crisis, I think, for this industry if we don't find a way to better strike that balance, better work on how to create the infrastructure to operate without burning people out, the need for succession planning and being reasonable about some of the expectations of the roles, and just so many things. And I'm sure you've seen this in your work, and how to really combat that, because we do need people in these roles. We do need these causes. And it's a bit terrifying to think about what will happen if we don't find a better solution for all of this.
I agree with you. And unfortunately, I'm not surprised by that statistic at all.
Yeah.
It's because I feel like there's a continuum. There are people who are drawn to the nonprofit sector because they care about it and they love a specific cause. And then when they get inside, they're kind of like, oh, this is not healthy for me. And then they leave sooner rather than later. And then other end of the spectrum, like lifers, right? People who
Mm-hmm.
organization for 10, 20 years, they care about it so much, but they may be the ones who are actually perpetuating some of these unhealthy behaviors
Mm,
because they're so bought in. They're so bought into the, we're going to do this no matter what. I'm going to do this no matter what. It doesn't matter if I work 12, 14-hour days if I don't take
mm,
my vacation time. Colleagues, there's one person in particular that I remember feeling like, I'm really worried for you because this is
mm-hmm.
not sustainable what you're doing. And this person had a good 50 people on a downline from
Mm-hmm.
him. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have 50 people who are watching this leader operate in a very unhealthy manner and sacrificing themselves and then thinking, well, how can I even begin to speak up for myself if this is what someone at the executive level is willing
Yeah.
to do? And so it's a crisis, I think, and this is part of it. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if I really explained my background a little bit more, but I grew
Yeah.
up on the nonprofit fundraising side and
Mm-hmm.
last 5 years in the C-suite. 14 years ago is when I started my coaching practice. And I was
Mm-hmm.
running on the side for 14 years while I was kind of like climbing the ladder and as a nonprofit executive. So it
Mm-hmm.
became a very interesting learning lab for me because
Yes.
both as a coach and a speaker and writer, really being kind of completely bought into
Mm-hmm.
self-care and empowerment and things like that. And then also being within an industry that I care so much about
Right.
that it as a heart-centered leader is really important, but also
Mm-hmm.
feeling, I will admit to you, I am one of those people that left because
Mm-hmm.
it
Same.
became inattainable. Now, it
Yeah.
was part of my long-term plan anyway, but
Mm-hmm.
I ended up walking away more abruptly than I had planned to because there was a point where I was like having chest pains.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
it just is not healthy. And nobody should allow themselves to be subjected to things that are harming their health.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason also that I decided to create this space in my practice to support nonprofit leaders
Mm-hmm.
because I've been there, because I know exactly what it is that we have dealt with, that you and I have dealt with over
Yeah.
time. And I know the struggle of wanting to make a difference. And, if you're working with people, if you're dealing with hunger, I used to work for Habitat for Humanity,
Yeah.
all of these different causes, there are people who have very urgent needs that
Mm-hmm.
you care about. And so it
Right.
does, and especially for women, because we tend to
Mm-hmm.
be a bit more empathetic. We are
Sure.
in a lot of ways um, socialized to put other people before ourselves and all those
Mm-hmm.
things as well. So yeah, I kind of went on a rant there. All right, I think
No,
I got.
I love that context because and I'm feeling like you're telling my story in so many ways. And it's you said that there's kind of two people that oftentimes show up, those that get in and quickly realize this, or maybe not quickly, but at some point realize this is not sustainable for me. Brilliant, talented, well meaning, committed people that have
Mhm,
to choose self or work, you know,
mhm, mhm,
or the people that, hey, I'm ride or die, I'm a lifer, I'm in it, that continue to perpetuate a lot of the issues of people that leave to begin with. And that's a very true statement. Because I'm definitely in the camp of I'm still committed to this work, but I have to do it in a different way. I have to do it in a different way. And so therein lies the practice I started, and similar to you, right? How do you stay connected to this community while still preserving yourself? And same, I also felt almost like I had no choice, which for a long time made me sad because I had wanting to be committed to, lifting up these organization, particular organization, or, my plan was always to work with one. Now I tell people I got the added bonus. I work with about 200 now on a daily basis, but But I didn't know that at the time. I was kind of went through that grieving process when I felt like, this, I guess this is it. I can't do this work anymore. So all of these things are really topics I'm passionate about because there's just so much more work and support that needs to be done. Which, speaking of which, tell us a little bit more about the work that you do or support you offer to leaders, in that nonprofit space. If people are listening to this conversation, like I'm tired of feeling alone in this. I need someone to talk to about it or share in this experience. What kind of services do you offer these leaders?
Absolutely. So I provide coaching for leaders. So it's all my executive coaching. I actually years ago worked with a nonprofit leader who went from the local level to the executive to the national level at a nonprofit after working with me. And she was like, "We need you. We women in nonprofits, we need you." It stuck with me, over time. So there is the kind of taking that classic life and career and executive coaching and mapping it onto nonprofit leaders, but there's also team building, there's also holding these conversations, working with boards to help them to kind of understand a little bit more about the struggle, because sometimes board members can be very well intentioned, but also not being in it on a day-to-day basis. And depending on the power dynamic, the executive director or the CEO may or may not trust sharing more because they're really in the business. These are their bosses. And so they're making sure that everybody's happy with the work that they're doing, but not necessarily maybe showing and disclosing some of the things that are problematic unless it's a very trusting relationship. So there's that piece of. I also started a program called Sweet Freedom, which I birthed it during the pandemic, and really is kind of taking that whole just do you piece and really doubling that, drilling into. There are sometimes we put up with things, whether it be a workplace, whether it be a significant other, whether it be I don't dream anymore because I'm stuck in my current circumstance, or there's a dream that I had, but I abandoned it because of X, Y, Z. And it might be a partner. It might be the time of life, when people have young children, their lives are in a pace, and then they get older and they're kind of like, oh, I have more time and more space. What was that I said I wanted to be when I grow up?
Right. Lost yourself.
Yeah. So it's the idea of really making very deliberate choices, finding is that you need to say no to, finding the courage to do that, going through some of the inner work in order to be strong enough to say yes to yourself, and then making that plan to do that. And then, of course, do speaking and, team building and retreats and things of that nature as well.
That's incredible. And thank you for committing so much of your energy and your work into helping solve, at least in part, some of these challenges. Trina, if people want to find you or access your resources or connect with you in any way, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So, of course, I'm on LinkedIn. I think that's where we met. And I'm also on social media at My Coach Trina on Instagram and X. On Facebook, you can look up Just Do You Institute. I also have a YouTube channel. And my website is justdoyouinstitute.com. And there I also have a free gift right on the homepage. It's a download called a career decisions toolkit. And so it really helps people to think about these junctures that they may be at, whether it's leaving one job in the same industry or considering working for yourself or considering retirement. Go through a very methodical process of having people to kind of put some left brain to that process and think through things. So that's available for anyone who would like to have it. And my email is Trina, Trina, at mycoachtrina.com.
Okay. Lots of ways to get, your content and, follow you on social media, and Trina at mycoachtrina.com if you want to just email directly. But Trina, this has been such an awesome conversation, and I know it's got to really resonate with a lot of people that are going to be listening. So thank you again for joining us in this conversation today about such an important topic.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you for holding this space. I'm looking forward to hearing more. I was listening to some of the shows, leading up to this, but I definitely will be following and listening and cheering you on as well.
Thank you. Yeah, we definitely do a mashup of topics from, of course, finance, management, accounting, to technology, to board management, all of the things that really, relate to running a nonprofit organization. I tell people I'm a nonprofit operations junkie. I love all of the things that makes all of the wheels turn. So shameless plug for those of you listening, just engage with the content in any way. It just helps other leaders of nonprofits find conversations like this. So if you're streaming this on audio, give me a like, a rating, a comment. If you're watching this on YouTube, engage with it some way, or any other social media platform. Just do that for me if you found this conversation useful, because like I said, it'll help other people find this content as well. Thanks again. See you next episode.
That's all we have for you today. Once again, I'm Tasha Anderson with the Charity CFO, and this is a Modern Nonprofit Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to a Modern Nonprofit Podcast on all major streaming platforms so you will stay notified for when the latest episode drops, which will help you stay in the know about anything nonprofit related. Also, join our community on Facebook by searching for a Modern Nonprofit Podcast and follow us on all of our social media accounts. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.